From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. March is Colorado's snowiest month, which means lots of us will be looking to make fresh tracks on that deep powder this time of year. And if you live in Colorado, you know that amazing powder brings with it truly astonishing sunburns for skiers and snowboarders. There are scientific reasons that your friends come home from the slopes with goggle marks scorched onto their faces. And one scientist wants to make sure people understand why.
When I'm out on the slopes, I'm looking at the snow. When I'm sitting on the chairlift, I'm looking at how the snowpack properties vary across this elevation gradient.
Stephen Fosnaught is a professor of snow hydrology at Colorado State University. He recently published an article about the intense reflectivity of fresh snow. And the science behind it is fascinating.
We love to go get those fresh turns in, knee-deep powder. We love to go out on that bluebird day where it's nice and sunny. And I would like to give some people some ideas behind why we get sunburned so they can think about this and then go, oh, yes, I need to put on sunscreen. I need to wear protective clothing when I go out on that fresh powder day.
Now, my thought, and I didn't grow up here. I moved to Colorado, but my impression was that because we're at higher altitude here, that's why we get bad sunburns here. But that is not the case.
There's a little bit of truth to that. We live at higher elevation. When we go to the mountains, we're at 10,000 feet. Because we're at higher elevation, we have less atmosphere and less atmosphere to block that light coming in, especially the ultraviolet light. But it's not because we're closer to the sun.
Okay. So before we get into explaining the link between fresh powder and severe sunburns, I want to talk about an important concept. Albedo is a key term that's used to describe the reflectivity of the snow.
Sure. Think of it as, you said, reflectivity. Think about it as shininess. So it's the ratio of how much is reflected from a surface to how much is coming in. And when we think about different media, they have different reflectiveness, different shininess. Let me give you some extreme examples. Think of a nice sunny day and you have fresh black asphalt that's really dark. The albedo, the reflectivity of that might be 5%, which means that however much sun is coming in from above, you've only got 5% of that reflecting. The other extreme is going to be a mirror where you've got essentially 100% reflecting. The fresh snow is a lot closer to that mirror. That shininess, that reflectiveness, albedo of fresh snow can be 95%, meaning that you have a lot coming in and almost all of that is being reflected.
That makes sense.
And then we think of that older snow that's been on the bunny hill. It might be down to 65%. If it's melting, that may be down to 50%. That means if it's down to 50%, you only have half of what's coming in as reflecting back.
Okay. Oh, I can picture that. Thanks for that visual. So the science behind why powder is much more reflective is really fascinating. Take us down to the microscopic scale and explain why fresh, pure snowflakes reflect more light than those that have been, sitting around on the slope for a while.
Think of when you were a kid and you took a piece of paper and you folded it up and then you cut it into a snow crystal, a snowflake.
Yeah.
And you pull it apart. Well, there's lots of different angles on that. And that's what fresh snow looks like. It has lots of angles. There's lots of pointy bits. And each of those angles helps reflect the light back. Now, we think of that stuff that's been on the hill, the machine-made snow. Those are round balls. They have less surfaces to reflect that light from.
Now, zooming out, the amount of snow also affects how reflective the surface of a mountain is. How does the depth of the powder change its reflectivity?
The light will go through the snow. Think of that fresh powder day. If you've got knee-deep powder, that sun's not making its way, or very, very little is making its way through that powder to the surface underneath it. But if you
Sure.
have an inch of fresh snow, that sun will be going through that inch of fresh snow, and what's the albedo, the reflectivity of what's underneath it is going to be important.
So, a fresh powder day in Colorado is more conducive to sunburn than a fresh powder day in, say, Maine. Can you talk about why that is?
Several reasons. One, the nature of the fresh snow itself. And here we think of these lovely fresh powder days in January, February, March. The snow itself tends to be more reflective. It tends to be that fresh snow with lots of angles. We think of snow back east, or even think of the snowfalls that we get in October in the Front Range or in April or May. That's wetter snow. That snow is less shiny, less reflective.
Stephen, you wrote about how the angle of the sun also contributes to more severe sunburns during winter months. Can you explain how that works?
We can think of the sun hitting the Earth's surface, hitting our skin, like a flashlight that points down. And if we think of a flashlight that points directly down, we have a small area, which means that we have a lot of intensity. And if you angle that flashlight, you get a bigger area that the flashlight shines on, so you have less intensity. So if we think of December, January, the sun is lower in the sky. So we have less intensity because the sun is spread over a bigger area than in March, for example, where that sun at noon is going to be higher in the sky.
Huh. So, Stephen, just so we're clear with all this talk of the sun and powder, are you telling Colorado skiers and snowboarders to avoid powder days?
Not at all. Not at all. It's just be cautious. I mean, avoid powder days or show up a little later so that I can get some turns in first. But besides that, please put on your sunscreen. Skin cancer is a big problem. Wear protective layers. Wear those buffs, the balaclavas. Make sure you have some really good sunglasses and or goggles. Make sure you put on that sunscreen multiple times.
Mm.
We often put it on in the morning and then forget about it. Reapply that sunscreen.
Stephen Fosnot is a professor of snow hydrology at Colorado State University. He recently wrote about the science behind those intense sunburns that skiers and snowboarders get. We'll put a link to it in our show notes and at KUNC.org. And while you're there, take a moment to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. It's an easy way to stay informed with headlines and updates from the KUNC newsroom delivered right to your inbox every Wednesday. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.